Hi, everyone. Welcome to another great episode of Shattering Glass and Heels. I'm really excited about my next guest, Carla Messer, Chief Results Officer of Bestwork. Hey, Carla.
Hey, Christine. I'm glad to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to have you. So, one of the things about just not just being, my good friend, but in just so many iterations, you and I met at the YWCA Rising Star program, became really good friends. But you've also been an executive coach to me for so many years, and just really helping me, navigate through the different seasons of my life and my career and all those transitions, and also really helping me. And my teams as I grow. And I really, really, really appreciate that. And just appreciated just the fact that I've had this 20 plus relationship together, both personal and professional. And I mentioned you at the book as well for being really able to help me and the value of coaches, um, you know, uh, uh, um, as part of like the people that you have within your ecosystem to help you succeed in your career. And so maybe want to, touch base a little bit on that. And obviously we'll get a little bit of insights in the book. You're one of the first readers of the book. So want to get your perspectives as well on that. But let's talk a little bit about coaching, right? And what the importance of coaching and why coaches are important and why it's really important to have like that as within your career. So
Yeah, this might be a little disruptive, but I don't have a prescriptive idea about what coaching is. And so I think the very first tenet of coaching is being able to listen, and this idea of discovery and really unpacking what's going on with that individual so that you know best what is going to be the most effective, course of or strategy of action together. And so, understanding a little bit about somebody's background or history comes in lots of different forms. First of all, it's listening and getting to know one another and just hearing each other's stories. But I'm also a fan of these objective assessments that allow me to step away from any bias I might have or any preconceived ideas or notions and give me talent, data, analytics that I can use to then make even better decisions together collectively, because coaching was always a we, but I don't like to be prescriptive and think that this is the one and only way, that the number one coaching method or model, because I find that some people need a thinking partner, and I am really good at being a muse and being able to just bounce ideas, be a strategist with some folks, and then in other cases we have very, very discrete and defined goals that we're going to pursue. And I found that, in our coaching, mentoring, co-relationship, we've stepped in all those arenas. I think you would agree. So depending on where each of us were in our lives, what season we were in, we have enjoyed every form of coaching in our
you know,
relationship.
I love how you brought up unbiased data, right? And taking a step back and having that perspective. And so that was one thing that you introduced me on very, very early on, which is the Harrison assessment. And
Yeah.
I think I've done 2 Harrisons, and just I think gave me a lot of insights of understanding me, what makes me tick, and and my anticipated behaviors of when things don't go my way, and how that and areas where I can work on, just really based on this data. But what I also just really loved about it was like it also tells me like, oh, the things that I'm good at, what I should focus on, the things that I like but I'm not good at, like that was, I think, the very first Harrison was really, really important for me, because it's like early in my career, it's like, yeah, I can do everything. But there was also this piece around like, well, what are you really passionate about? Just because you're good at something doesn't mean that that's what's also going to motivate you and wake you up in the morning. But like this idea of unbiased data that you and I have worked through with the Harrison, a couple of different dimensions. One, we've used it for me personally to understand, just me, myself, my data, and areas that I can improve. But we've used it across for my teams as well. When I've onboarded teams, I've used the Harrison, and I never really thought about it, but it does neutralize it for me, where I actually look at the data itself and I don't have the biases and perceptions of the person, right? And I think I love the fact, like when I've in the past where I've had inherited teams, right, where people say, well, this person is so and so and so and so, and you get this kind of bias from other people that are saying there, and you watch that, and And I think that that's actually dangerous when you're onboarding a team to get that bias from someone else. And then, but then you and I just strip that out. And I've used this Harrison assessment to say, hey, fresh slate, look at this very, very differently. The behavior that they may have been exhibiting to say that there's a bias that other people are observing may be a result of something else, but like, it's not performance, it's something else. Like, I just love Harrison. And I know these are some of the use cases that you and I have used that, but you've used Harrison in other different ways. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because I just love this idea of unbiased data and how that really can help change so many dimensions of not just dealing with a coaching situation or onboarding a team, but across a dimension of managing talent in a corporation. And I think that that's super important.
Yeah, Christine, thanks for being a raving fan, because I also am a raving fan, and I've been using this tool since 2006. I was certified for the first time in 2006 and have continued to just increase my knowledge of this tool as they have added onto it as well. And the thing that really, I've used a lot of assessments. I'm actually certified in a lot of different assessments, because when you work in organizational development, different organizations are, using a different assessments, et cetera. And so, and I'm a lover of human behavior. And so when I was exposed to this tool, the thing that really impressed me was exactly what we're talking about, which is the ability to take out bias and instead focus on what are the work behaviors that are correlated with success for this role. And so we're getting really specific right now about how does this person succeed or compare to high potentials, other people doing that same role. And so, in many cases, coaches, either use some form of assessment to understand personality, or have a way that they, interview, et cetera, and use qualitative data. At the same time, much of that still is rooted with bias and or falls woefully short. And so when I talk about looking at a tool that allows us to examine 175 pieces of data, this means that I can look at it for succession planning and be able to look and see whether or not somebody is ready now or ready with a little bit of development for a new role. It allows me to look at broadly an organization or an individual's engagement and retention factors. But, from the thing that I really love is the ability to build teams. And you've had an opportunity for you to look at the folks that are on your teams in the past, and you can just really begin to remove any of the emotion that might come from an experience you're having with an employee, and instead look at the data and say, aha, this is what's going on right now. This person is under stress, so they're behaving this different way, or I see what's going on. This person has a preference for this type of behavior, and so they're leaning into that or leaning away from that under stress. So now I have this new way of viewing the team, and I can see similarities and differences, so that when there's tensions between people, we now have, kind of the tools that we can figure that out a little bit more scientifically, and more importantly, solve it and get on to the business of doing business, which is what every organization and every person, every manager wants, right? We don't want to spend all this time trying to manage conflict of, the interpersonal details. And once we understand our differences, then we can work together.
No, I love it, because it's factual and it's behavioral. It to your point, it takes out the pieces that are that could potentially bring the biases, right? The ideas of gender, the ideas of race, like it strips all of that out and actually gives you the data around pure performance and skill sets and talent. And I mean, you've been using this tool for a while. You and I have used this in so many dimensions in different parts of my career. Why aren't a lot of companies adopting to something like this, especially like in like recruiting and like executive leadership? Like, how you've been in this space for so long, like, and obviously for me, from as I climb in my career, and even the dimensions of the book that you and I've talked about, like the dimension of race for me and gender is very, very real. And those statistics are real. My experiences are real. And it's not just me, the experience of other people. Like, what is it about, like, just these kinds of tools and some of the hesitancies of being able to actually use these tools or adopt to these tools that take out this bias, that I would think that it would drive better diversity, equity, and inclusion and accelerate that?
Oh wow, you have really opened up a can of worms here, and there are lots of reasons. And the truth is, a lot of big organizations do use assessment, but there are assessments and there are assessments, and so they're not all created equal. And then we have a lot of organizations that rely heavily on behavioral interviews, which still has a low correlation to being able to identify people who have the traits that are exhibited by high potentials. So, it's an interesting conversation to have. And, my short answer is it's probably different for every organization. So depending on the size of the organization, it may be a perceived cost issue, even though comparatively the cost of turning over somebody or having to replace someone is far more than, spending $50 on an assessment before somebody is hired. It seems ridiculous when you say it out loud, but some organizations run very tight on their budgets and their hiring. And so, I have often thought that in this very tight job market, that assessment would be the extra assurance that some organizations would want and need. And in fact, we have seen an uptick in people using these assessments behaviorally. And so, the answer is people are using them. Why aren't they more widely used? We do still have bias in hiring. You talk about it. You talk about it in the book. There is bias in promotion. I talk about it in my dissertation work, where we talk about the spaces where people get connected that lead to promotion, and how we get access, and being outsiders, within, and being inside the organization, but still feeling like an outsider, whether that's because of gender or race or any number of other isms that we find that come into play in the workforce. And so it is challenging to look at who's the most qualified when we like to hire our friends sometimes, or people we already know, people that are known entities, versus the person who scores most suitably for the role. So we have work to do still.
Tons of work to do. Yeah, that's for sure, to kind of break some of that. But I'm trying to think within my career. Um, I think I would say like 3 organizations, enterprise level type organizations, where I've had to take like a screener assessment that was more like psychological based, like very similar to the Harrison, before like I even like went through with the interview process. And I thought that was very, very interesting. But I mean, that's just a handful in comparison to, a lot of the companies, and even me being on the side of being hiring people. I know that a lot of the companies I work for, right, don't use that kind of assessment. And so,
Mhm.
and it's more like when you're in the door that the assessment is used to, help build teams. But I love tools like this because it does make me a much more efficient leader, and it does help me as well keep me straight in terms of like really understanding the data, but also keeping my unconscious biases in check. So, I hope more people would use things like that. Especially executive leaders, right, who are thinking about, managing teams and people. I think that that's really, really, really important. So
Well, and the challenge, Christine, is that you're able to read something about yourself or about someone else and really internalize that. You're gifted with skills that most of us just only dream of. So this idea that we can actuate what we actually hear or read is very different. And so why do people need coaching? Because coaches oftentimes are reminding executives about the need to lean into the data and lean into what we know, versus this kind of knee-jerk reaction where we might just go to immediately, like, why is this person so difficult to be around, or fill in the blank, any number of things. And so instead, in this coaching relationship, it is a gentle nudge and a reminder for people who don't have a photographic memory to be able to jump in and be reminded, like, oh yes, I have this data that is reliable and validated, and that my employees have also said, yes, this represents me, and this is the way that I work. And so there is some level of transparency associated with assessment, if done right, I believe, where teams that are in organizations that are practicing this idea of deliberately developmental, I'll get it out, deliberately developmental organizations. This idea that on purpose, we're going to be transparent and we're going to share, all the good stuff about us, all of our strengths. And we're going to, kind of show ourselves as we really are, like the things that happen when we go under stress, when we, want to go hide in a corner, or when we maybe lash out or get really quiet. These are things that leaders need to understand so that they can be adaptable. And to really be transformative as a leader means not treating everybody the same. It means understanding where to pivot and shift to make sure that everybody's different and unique behavioral kind of map is being honored and groomed, and developed.
Right. I mean, I love it because it's not going to solve all the problems, but it's a way to approach a conversation. And, especially when you're dealing with, the isms, right? And not anchoring around that, and you're really anchoring around kind of fact and factual behavior. That to me is a much more powerful way to approach a conversation than to like come into it with the isms and the stereotypes, etc. And I really wish that's just maybe another angle to start some of that conversation, and to really help facilitate, not having these unconscious biases kind of like come into the decision-making process. Right.
And, let's face it, we all have too much on our plate. Everybody has too much on their plate. And so being able to understand each individual on your team and understand how to develop them in a way that's unique to them takes time, and it takes energy. And that is something that very few executives I know have. And oftentimes the time that I spend with some executives in a coaching capacity is actually doing work, and we're actually doing the work, and we're talking about another one of their reports that we need a development plan for. And so I'm modeling it in the coaching. We're working together, we're being thinking partners, but we're actually getting the work done together in a way that nets a higher result than if they did it on their own, for example, just because we have this talent analytics that we can rely on, and coupled with our own experience working with that individual. So it's a powerful combination, and it's way better than winging it, as I say.
Totally. Yeah, I know. I want to switch gears a little bit, right? Like not so much from the coaching topic, but women helping women, just the other dimension of our relationship. I know that there's another episode where we actually had the Council of Queens together, which is great, and had that reunion. But there is that dimension of our relationship as well, of just like women helping each other. And you, of all of my friends and people that I know, just spend so much time giving back to the community. That's just so much a part of your DNA, about just meeting someone and asking how you can help, no matter where they are in their career. And I tend to send a lot of people your way just because of that willingness to help and willingness to mentor, just being able to take someone no matter where they are in their career, being able to give them advice. But it's not just that, but also from all of the different things that you do in philanthropy to give back and help other women. I just want to talk a little bit about that dimension of you. Like, what drives you? Why are you so passionate about that? And like, it's not in your bone to have that female rivalry thing, but we've talked about this. It exists. But I'm gonna lend a lens to Carla and why what drives you, and why is that important?
Well, this is, a complex question, Christine. I mean, first and foremost, I am a person of faith, and I really believe that when you're given a lot of gifts and talents, that you are called to use those in ways that, expand. And so for me, it's really been easy to be a feminist, to be pro women, because early in my career, I found myself in very male-dominated industries where there were very few women, probably zero Asian women. And, I witnessed some of the queen bee kind of things that we talk about. I witnessed women that were mean to other women and occasionally mean to me. And so And I don't know, looking in hindsight, there may have been moments where I also modeled that, because
Yeah.
there was a time where it was a get ahead kind of atmosphere in the work culture. And for that, I apologize to anybody who may have felt that kind of competitive nature from me. But at some point, you really reach a point in your career and your life where you realize this is no longer about my climb. This is more about turning around and lifting up. And so when you make that shift, and I don't know if it's an age thing, I don't know if it's an experience thing, you get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm now hungry for other things. It doesn't mean I'm, jumping off the ladder, but it definitely means that I'm reaching down as much as I can to pull up women in every circumstance and in every walk of life. Marginalized women or not marginalized women, women who, sometimes have the appearance of having it all, oftentimes need the most hand up and the most help and the occasional hug. Yeah. So, it's just about, I mentioned in an earlier podcast, saying yes. And there are times when I'm tired, or I don't feel like I have the energy. And yet I'm always fulfilled every time I meet with somebody new. When you would send somebody my way and they would, reach out, or you would say to me like, oh, I'm going to send my friend to you, have her talk to you. And then there are times when I see somebody reach out to me on LinkedIn and I say, how do I know this person? Oh, I know how I know this person. I know this person from Christine. And we're, in dialogue again. And I think, this idea of helping other women, it connects you to other women for much longer than, you could ever imagine. And that is magic. That's what that is. That is
It is.
magic.
It is magic. And I mean, I know I've sent some people down your way, but you've also, have me involved in a lot of the things that you have. And honestly,
Mhm.
for me, it's been super fulfilling, like being involved with the IU cohorts over, well, that's not 17, 18 years. Is that really?
A long time.
And you're right. Like, there are people like also that I know from LinkedIn where, we talked about networking and helping them, like build their LinkedIn profiles earlier on when social media was so soon. But, and just seeing the dimensions of what that, you know, how people's journeys have changed and evolved and how we can help people. And to me, that has always been like a really important aspect of like that, my grandmother always said, you give and you give back. And that's the number one thing that you should be able to do, is just give and give. And I know, out of all the friends, I get it. My last name literally means Duke or Duchess, which really means I'm a queen, and I'm probably the biggest diva out of all of us, since I'm also soprano. But to debunk some of those things, though, it's just kind of funny. It was like, I think there's this dimension of diva that people think that you're really difficult, and in the opera world, actually, you have to earn the right to be a diva,
Mm.
meaning that you've put in all of the work and that you're flawless out on stage. And that Maria Callas they call diva, but she says, I earned the right to be a diva. And that's always the way that I thought about it, is like, I earned the right to be the diva. And then in terms of like the Queen Duchess thing, it's like, you and I talked about this, my leadership style. I'm not a dictator. I'm a collaborator. And then it just, some of you always ask, like, well, Christine, like, if you're really back in like ancient times, and your title and your pedigree from your family would really mean that you are a duchess, right? Which is with my family history. I was like, yeah, then I would be a queen for the people, right? There is that servant leadership
Yeah.
of how I see my leadership style, and very collaborative leadership style. That's just, I'm not good by myself. I'm only as good and successful as a team underneath me. But I know a lot of women don't think about it that way. They don't have the dimension of like being able to lock arms with someone. And honestly, you're right. I raised my hand when you said, a lot of people are really high powered positions and probably need someone to help. Like, yes, absolutely yes, because it is tiring, it is exhausting,
Isolating.
yeah, no, and to lock arms and even try to break the glass ceilings, right? Because there's just been so much, still that needs to happen, especially being the dimension of Asian. It's exhausting, and you need people to like lift you up, perk you up. And I think it's super important to have that community and that culture and the group of friends, the Council of Queens behind you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Literally,
And
it's about fixing each other's crowns, not trying to take the
mhm.
other crown off. You know.
And our relationship has been I don't know, that's not a good metaphor, but a hairball, right? I mean, we have just intertwined in a million ways, whether it was, consulting projects or, different personal things and helping each other professionally and making referrals to other people professionally. And it really has been the epitome of a jealousy free relationship where we both are elated. You see all these little memes about lifting, being happy for everybody, but we've been living that. We have been happy for each other. And then we have embraced each other during downtimes and cried for each other and been there for each other during tough times and lifted each other up in celebration. And so it really has been a friendship, mentorship, co-mentorship. We learn from each other. We lean into each other's strengths. I think that's the exciting thing too, is like we both know what we don't know but we know a person and there she is, right?
Yeah. It's true. It's totally true. I think that's really great. I mean, I think to me, it's like I talk a lot about it, like business is about people. And I feel like, I mean, pretty heavy conversations. Like you look in the last couple of weeks, the tech industry has just had layoff after layoff after layoff. And I've seen that as well, in the companies that I've been working with and a lot of my tech partners. And it's really, really, really tough, right? And I talk a little bit of the dimension of like, it feels like we've pivoted to a point where we're looking at names and numbers on a spreadsheet instead of people and talent in those dimensions. And I think it comes down to, just again, the relationship and that business is about people aspect of it where, you and I have this relationship that has dimensions of other times. And I think that that's also, we talked a little bit about is like, what's my stickiness? Like, the cold calling, all that stuff is kind of not my jam, but like, if you want long, sticky relationships and deepened relationships, and that's probably the characteristic of my relationships and even the business and the clients that I've had. It's that stickiness and that dimension of being in business and being together over a long period of time. And I'm not transactional. That's just not me in that dimension. But I think that that's a really kind of an important piece for also one of the pivots of like why I wrote the book and why I kind of put a little bit of that heart is that I feel like after the pandemic and everything else and where we're trying to balance, like looking at people and looking at talent as the dimensions of people is super important in business to drive kind of like that productivity, so
Yeah, I mean, it's typically one of the largest, line items on a budget. And so this is why when you're talking about layoffs, et cetera, bottom line decisions get made all the time. And so it is challenging. And I used to work in the outplacement industry and I would hear businesses say, it's not personal, this isn't personal. And I would say, it's very personal. It is very personal. Somebody is going to be, completely life changed and the people who are left behind are going to be changed. And it's a challenge when we have to, work through those types of changes. But I'm very optimistic about resilience and how resilient people are now, more so than my parents' age for sure, where they had a job forever and a day. But, people have a level of career resilience that is, I think, unmatched. Some of it out of necessity, survival, but some of it, as we saw in the time of COVID, where people were jumping ship like crazy and seeing big net gains in their salaries and or maybe their responsibilities. And so the world of work was dramatically changed during COVID. And I again think this is why it's even more important to not quit guessing about what matters to employees. You have a 20-minute online tool, or even if it's another tool, you can find information about what actually matters to individuals. Is it having their opinions valued? Is it having a seat at the table and being able to be part of that strategic voice? Is it money? We oftentimes lean on that, but oftentimes it really is not money. Chance to make decisions. There are lots of things. And if we know that, those are things that we can do to assure that we can get a little bit more retention and engagement out of folks.
Yeah, I love the dimensions of what you said, because it's like, what are your motivations, right? And it comes down to kind of what those behavioral pieces are. And, you're right. Sometimes it's not the dimension of money, it's not this, right? And I think oftentimes with women, there's always a conversation around life work balance. And I think so many of us have already said it doesn't exist. It's not about like trying to find balance, but it's about like, what is it that you are motivated against, right? Like to me, it's like my motivation every single day is like, I want to wake up in the morning and live my life with purpose and whatever that I'm doing.
Hmm.
And that's me showing up at work at my best self and showing up for my friends, my family, my partners, my nieces, my nephews, as my best self. And it's like the idea of finding kind of like, is there a moment that my day starts for work and stops, right? There isn't. It kind of is just like this dimension of just like, it just keeps going. And I love the fact that you just say, hey, how do you understand behaviors, people, motivations? Because at the heart of it, again, it comes down to like, it's about the people aspect of it, and not just like these like weird dimensions of like, work starts here and life starts here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, without even knowing it, this opens up a diversity conversation where we begin to look at the entire diversity of needs that we have for women with small children, neurodivergent individuals, individuals who may have other limitations, around their work or their transportation, and just really looking outside of our typical viewpoint. When we look outside our own viewpoints at some of these things, then it allows us to have a much richer workforce with a lot more tolerance for what you're talking
Yeah.
about, for people working throughout the day and bringing their life into work throughout the day, right? And
Yeah.
commingling those. Again, back
So
to the hairball.
exactly. I'm going to ask you a couple of different questions just based on like where you sit in your expertise and what you're seeing, right? A
Mhm.
little bit controversial. Just want to get your insight.
Mm.
Return to work post pandemic. What does that look like to you, right? Like, I think like there's so much debate. You've got company, and I talk about is 100-year-old companies and the 50-year-old companies, and like companies that have very stringent return to work, policies around, IP address login, like, tracking and badge swipes, et cetera. And just there's also a dimension of other younger generation who really refuses to go back to work. And I think it's a constant debate that is out there. Like, it's important to be in office. I find value and power in the room, but I like that purposeful. What are you seeing in terms of trends? Where do you think this is going to play out? Where does Carla's crystal ball see return to work in this new normal come in?
Well, look, the truth of the matter is there are pros and cons to this argument. And depending on your industry, depending on your role in that industry, the answer is always going to be it depends. And unfortunately, not everybody likes that. I hate to keep talking about assessment, but I can tell you who can work from home best and who cannot. And even though a job may be technically doable from home, not everybody has the right skill set to work effectively from home. In fact, recently there was an article I read about a woman who said, I'm never going to be hired again because they basically found out that I was not working from home when I was supposed to be working from home, because we have all these ways of tracking. And so this is every employer's biggest fear, is that somehow people are not going to be giving their all. And, as employers, one of the things as a manager, you're always looking to do is to capture that discretionary effort. And what I mean by that is like, if I can get my job done in 30 hours, don't we want that person to still work just as hard for that 10 hours and give me a little bit extra, give me the right? That's what we call the 110%. And so, what we have to do is to figure out who's motivated to do those things anyways and who's not. And I think companies, for the most part, some have figured this out very well, and they have used it as an attraction or in being able to attract some great talent to be able to say, hey, this is a work from home situation, etc. And then, rightly so, they deal with individual performance problems as they arise, not assuming that everyone's going to be a performance problem, but actually deal with the person, not group them into a large, kind of pool of people who can't work from home. That said, I also studied and wrote a lot about job embeddedness and community embeddedness. And so I do understand the importance of having a sense of work community and feeling like you have peers who have your back, that you can learn from, that you can, in a lighter coaching way, bounce ideas off of, brainstorm with, etc. And so yes, you can do all those things on a Zoom call, but there are some probably losses in terms of some of the kind of the energy of the room, and maybe even, the innovation that occurs when people are not in the room. I tend to lean towards there's a hybrid solution for this where, you have to be more planful, which again takes time and energy. You have to really be deliberate about what you want to accomplish. Stephen Covey said best, begin with the end in mind. And you have to think about, what am I trying to accomplish here before you just force people to come into an office certain number of days, because that builds resentment. And eventually that resentment turns into voluntary turnover where people say, I'm going to go somewhere else where they don't micromanage me, or they trust me, because ultimately some people equate this to an issue of trust.
Yeah. Trust. It really
Yeah.
is. I love that though. Like, an assessment can tell you who can work from home more efficiently and who can't. That's, I think, really, really, really important, because when people just, like, they want the convenience of working from home, but they're not the most productive.
Yes.
In my industry, in consulting, the best consultants are the ones that know how to adapt to situations. It's not because you're the best individual contributor, but you're the one who knows how to adapt to situations, because you're constantly being asked to adapt to a situation, right? Like, when we're traveling like 4 days a week, it was like, adapting to the situation of where you're going to work, what dimension we work, always constantly on the go, being able to work on the go, like in an airport, et cetera. And so, I think from that dimension, I think we actually make the best people to work from home because we can work anywhere, right? But not everyone is kind of used to that kind of like craziness. And so I think I had, one of my nieces was visiting me, and she's just like, is this just like your life, like your constant? I was like, yeah, I'm driving, I'm talking, I'm like going, and I'm like, she's like, I was like, yeah, this is the thing. And I realized that not everyone can manage that same beat and that level of complexity,
Yeah.
in the same way that not everyone can actually do global jobs, because the dimension of surfing through time zones, et cetera, and having to balance and manage your life is really difficult. And you and I talked about this, I thrive into this. Like, one of the things that you and I discovered earlier in my life is like, yeah, I'm one of those people, when you see a burning building, I want to go into the burning building and fix it. So it was just kind of like those aha moments. I'm like, oh, like, this is about me. I like to solve problems, and these are the things that make me tick.
Yeah.
And other people just would freeze up, or that's just not what they want to do, not they motivate. I think that's super, super important. Like, yeah, return to work. I like that, but you're right. It is a dimension of different industries and that hybrid mentality. And I still believe in the power of the room, but I believe in the power of the purposeful room. Because I do have a lot of people and clients who do come to the office and are going to the office, but they're not engaging with the people that they need to engage with because their teams are not there. And that's really frustrating, to kind of bring in that commute aspect and then not have that. So I see all sides of the argument. It's not a one size fits all solution, unfortunately. But I think, to me, what also prompts me to really raise the question is that when you look at the statistics, during the pandemic, it was women who were first that were really laid off, and either they were laid off or that they had to ask to be laid off because they were in the caretaker position, had to take care of the family. And now, coming back post pandemic, right? It's with these kind of harsh restrictions around inflexibility of work, right? It's harder for women to come back, and even harder for women within the BIPOC community to come back, because it's not just a dimension of like immediate family, but multi-generational households. And, I think just really finding back flexibility, not just, I think, for women, but flexibility that people are really asking for, to be able to manage their life and work very seamlessly, right? In those dimensions. And I don't think that there's a perfect solution yet, but that I think the idea of flexible workplaces was already an issue before the pandemic. And I think
Yeah.
I think it's just probably heightened even more.
I
So
mean, I've been working from a home office since the late 90s before it was ever cool. But, I think whether you're in efficiency or not, post pandemic, I think woke a lot of people up to how inefficient it is to commute for an hour and a half and then
4
work and
hours
then
sometimes.
go,
Yeah.
yeah, or 2 hours or whatever it might be. I was thinking one way, but yeah, two ways or whatever it is. The amount of time lost and the amount of connection with your family or loved ones lost, all of that stuff became something that became very difficult to give up in terms
Yeah.
of, you don't have to label it work-life balance. For me, it's an efficiency story.
Efficiency.
It's about efficiency. Like, oh, I could drive in the rain for an hour and a half to an office and then work all day, or I could do an extra hour and a half of work. I can have more work-life balance by throwing a load of wash in the while I'm also in another part of the house doing work. I can have clothes in the washing machine. I mean, it's a hard thing to unsell that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
come back from those ideas of efficiency, of being able to recapture some part of our life, be a little bit less tired. And, at the same time, there is an element of privilege to it because, there are certain jobs that simply cannot be done from home, right? We can't clean hotel rooms. We can't, work in restaurants from home. None of these things happen from home. And so there does become this, I think, this level of our gap there in our work understanding, and the ways that we view
Mm,
work. And so, and again, when you mentioned BIPOC and, we do have people oftentimes that are on the margins and may also be people of color. And we, you know, purposely look at these conversations about return to work with less of an eye on those folks who don't have those options, right? And so I think it's just important for us to constantly be in conversation about, like, what are the ways that we're offering them some of those same perks, whether it's the ability to have some flexibility to, not have to work an 8 to 5, but to work a 6 a.m. to, in order to pick their kids up from school. And I think that's really what you were suggesting too, is just this idea of flexibility and how do we become more enlightened to the way that people's lives unfold and make it easier for people to do life and work,
yeah.
because we need workers, right? And so people are willing to bend and, you know, pay people, double the minimum wage or whatever they need to do in order to attract the best candidates. And it's a real challenge on both sides of this argument. It really is. I have empathy on both sides.
It really is. I know. So yeah, no, I think it's going to be very, very interesting to watch and to see, especially when you start to even throw the dimension of technology and data and AI, which is also starting to, kind of have even more of an impact. Does that mean that you're actually going to get more efficiency in what you're doing? So, like, are we questioning now the 40-hour work week, or how much stretch and extension? Like, we can go on and on and on all day about all those different dimensions, but it's definitely a lot, to
Yeah, it's
take in.
exciting. And so weirdly, I'm doing some sorry. So oddly, I'm doing some spring cleaning in my office, and I'm going through old books, and I'm thinking, oh, this book is, just super old. And I ran across this, like, HR in 2025 and, all these predictor books that you buy 5 years ago, and they're supposed to be telling you what's going to come out 10 years. And then you kind of scratch your head and you say, oh, well, COVID basically and AI together, those two things I think combined, um, every single book that was predicting is now moot, because you have a completely different landscape that it's not any book written before 2020 now is suspect, really, in some way or shape, because um, we are in a different world. It's just
We
that
we
simple.
are we are in such a different world, and it's yeah, it's just, I think COVID has forced us to really relook at our humanity and the dimensions of kind of like really what matters in life, more, and what is your the intention and your purpose. And for me, oh gosh. It was a rehaul of so many old narratives or things that I kind of brought in myself, but then then you add the dimension of technology on top of everything else. Like, I was one of the few people who were just like really, really, really busy, because a lot of companies were like, how soon can you stand us up? And it was like, oh, it was on our 2-year roadmap, it's on our 3-year roadmap. I didn't think that it was going to adapt to it, but like, how soon can you stand us up? Because it was a reality.
Yeah.
For survival, and just in a way to accelerate, really, our even more digital, world and dependency on technology. To be honest with you, to run our lives. So,
and probably doing things you never thought possible. And this is what I mean by like, you just reinvent the rules. And I'm using a little hyperbole about any books before then. Obviously, research and all these things still matter, but it just is such a cataclysmic shift in the way that we work, sending everybody home, and then, being able to really understand some of the gaping holes that organizations had in the way that they managed. And this is what you're talking about, jumping into understand fulfillment in different ways in a pandemic and post-pandemic world.
Thank you so much for jumping on to the podcast. I don't know if I covered all of the topics. I'll let you, but we definitely covered a lot of ground. And I know that, you're also in another, much more fun episode of the Council of Queens. Not as serious of a topic, but but really, really good things. But thank you so much for jumping on the podcast. Thank you for all of your support with the book, and just years and years and years. Gosh, like you've seen, I think you have all of my friends and people have seen like every iteration of me, and just from the beginning of my career to where I am right now. And I'm so grateful and just so honored to have you as my friend, and just to have your talent and expertise in my corner to make me better.
I feel the same way. It has been really, you are definitely like a sister to me, and we can laugh together, cry together, but really we can kick some butt together, because when we put our heads together on a strategy or an idea, neither one of us are afraid to, poke holes in an idea. We both have this analyzing pitfalls as strengths of ours that, we are going to go in it. And that's what makes it a powerful duo, is that when we get together, it's not about ego. It's about solving problems. And that's exciting when you have somebody in your life that you can go to solve problems. So,
and add the dimension of really great Mexican food on top of that, like you can conquer the world.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Carla.
All right. My pleasure.
Talk soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to my podcast. I hope this has inspired you to continue the fight for equality, challenge stereotypes, and lift as we climb. We'd love to hear from you. Amplify the conversation on social media, following @DuquesseCD. For more information about me and my Amazon best-selling book, Walking in My Shoes, Shattering Glass Ceilings in Corporate America, check out DuquesseCD.com.